many of us have heard of Florence Nightingale? Virtually all of us, since we just had a children's story about that, right? How many have heard of Clara Barton? Most of us. How many knew they had ties to Unitarian Universalism? A number of us. Fabulous. So Florence Nightingale, born in 1820 in Florence, hence her name. I forget, her sister's name is unequally, she was named after the place she was born to, only it was some Greek place with a really interesting name, but it would have been better if I remembered. Anyway, Florence Nightingale was the first famous nurse. She taught us about cleanliness and decent food and sunshine being important to helping people recover from illness. She did invent some statistical things. She was the lady of the lamp who sort of first understood that mental health is part of getting the body better. Her parents were Unitarians. They were rich. They were part of the system, as it were. Her father was an MP. She herself wasn't so much into organized religion, so maybe she was a Unitarian. She did believe that our beliefs have to show up in our actions, so that's kind of Unitarian. And she was definitely Universalist, even though she attended the Church of England all her life. There was at one point she was helping a prostitute who was dying and who was expressing how terrified she was that she was going to go to hell here as soon as she'd passed away. And evidently Florence replied, "Oh, my girl, are you not now more merciful than the God you think you are going to? Yet the real God is far more merciful than any human creature ever was or could imagine." So, definitely Universalist, maybe not Unitarian. And she was against religious discrimination against other Christian denominations and made sure there wasn't discrimination against other traditions, Judaism and Muslim in particular. So, pretty cool human being and definitely Unitarian Universalist ties. Clara Barton was born a year later in 1821. She was known as the Angel of the Battlefield in the Civil War, and actually was called the Florence Nightingale of America for her actions during the Civil War. At one point, a bullet passed through the sleeve of her gown and killed the guy she was working on. That's how close to the battle she was. She was rewarded for this valor by being given more and more power and authority to do good things for the health of human beings after the war. And as she moved up the ranks in that system, she was also outspoken about women's suffrage and civil rights. She was one of the few people that were advocating for women's suffrage who actually advocated for the 15th Amendment to give black men, but not black women, the vote. And she brought the Red Cross to the United States. The Red Cross had existed in the international world for a while, and it took her a couple of times to convince the U.S. president to make it happen, but she brought the Red Cross here as well. She grew up in a Universalist church again. Very late in her life, she got more interested in spiritualism and Christian Science, but she maintained her Universalism, and when one of the Universalist churches wrote to her and asked about that, she affirmed very late in her life that she had been a Universalist throughout her life, so most definitely get to claim her. And Francis Ellen Watkins Harper was black. She was born in Baltimore to free parents whose names we don't know. Yet another tragedy of human history. She attended the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME Church, there in Baltimore. Eventually she got a job as a domestic in a Quaker household, and they gave her access to their library and encouraged her to read and read more and write. She began writing poetry and fiction and got some of that published. After the fugitive slave law was passed, she had to move away from Baltimore, and she began working with the Underground Railroad to help slaves escape. She learned of Unitarianism through that work and abolitions. After the Civil War, she joined a Unitarian church in Philadelphia, and she fought for women's suffrage and equal rights for African Americans. She became part of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. So maybe not Unitarian because she didn't want people to drink. Kind of a weird joke. I'll pull that all back. She was known as the mother of African American journalism, and really did most of her life put forth the equity and equality and better, more healthy community. So she maintained her membership in both the Unitarian Church there in Philadelphia and the AME Church. She had a really Unitarian Christology. She did not believe that Jesus was the all and only the Son of God, but she felt more home in the AME Church. They eventually had her funeral in the UU Church, or it was still Unitarian Church at that point. So again, Francis Ellen Watkins Harper, a Unitarian as well. These three women who lived out their commitment to health and the well-being of their community, and did so with such passion and long-term commitment that it's causing me to deepen my own commitment to the well-being of our community, and has made me think about what does that look like these days here after 2.5 years of pandemic, and now it's moving into endemic, and things are changing. What does a commitment to the health of our community look like today? As you are no doubt aware, from the beginning of the pandemic, our UUA encouraged us to strive to be both healthy and inclusive as possible. At first, that really led us to focus on physical health, and eventually it became clear that mental health is also a part of that humans need to gather with other humans, most of us, and some of us need it a lot, and so we have to balance all of these things. We locked down and isolated until we had vaccines, and then we had variants of the virus which kept changing the approach we would take and what we felt safe and what did not. We've taken some booster shots. As a society, we've tried different approaches and strategies. We sent checks to people, and we had real conversations about universal basic income. What a nice idea. We had musicians and artists moving online. We had business moving online. We had families learning how to do Zoom calls. We had sports bubbles. We reclaimed city streets to have restaurant seating. Instead of ceding all that space to cars, we made space for human interaction in safer ways. And some progressive thinkers really encouraged us to not hurry back to normal, because normal was never all that great before. It was not equitable for most humans. Let us create a new normal. Let us co-create something better. I myself reiterated that call in at least a few sermons. Our immunocompromised cousins welcomed us into the fight they'd been fighting for a long time. They shared their techniques for dealing with isolation and illness, and they rejoiced as the grocery store began delivering to them, and we had online worship services so they didn't have to miss the connection to their loved ones. They actually had some of their lives enriched by the pandemic, and they wanted us to feel that. Notice what it's like to be isolated and change society for the better for all of us, to enrich all of our lives. But the pressure to get back to normal is so powerful. The siren song of the economy is so blasted loud. And pandemic fatigue sets in, and people just get sick of it and don't want to wear a mask and don't want to take the precautions and just want to go to a restaurant and have a meal together. Almost like New Year's. I'll speak for myself. Sometimes my New Year's resolutions, I start out strong, I create new, healthier habits, and then kind of go back to the old, less healthy, comfortable, distracted ways. That's kind of what happened to the pandemic in our culture. Now, as far as our President Biden says, COVID is no longer a pandemic. I think he's right. It is an endemic now. It's everywhere. There are a few immunocompromised folks who still try occasionally to sound the alarm and rally us to live richer lives together and co-create something better, to not settle for normal. Health professionals these days are warning us that long COVID is a big deal. As we heard in our first reading, the CDC reports that almost 20% of those who have had COVID report symptoms of long COVID. 1 in 13 adults in our United States, that's 7.5% of the people, have long COVID symptoms. Over 10 million people are living with respiratory and cardiac issues, chronic fatigue, and sometimes debilitating cognitive issues. One of the most common and least well understood symptoms of long COVID is so-called brain fog. Brain fog is a cutesy way of saying brain damage. As Ed Young wrote in the Atlantic magazine, it affects executive function, which is the term for skills including focusing attention, blocking out distractions, and holding information in mind. All of that is so foundational that if you lose them, a lot of really basic things like planning, multitasking, concentration become almost absurdly difficult. Young reports that some people with brain fog stop driving because they cannot remember where they're going or how to get there. Others cannot read because they don't have the concentration to hold the plot details in mind. I love reading, and I like driving. And if wearing this thing is going to make it more likely I can keep doing those things, I'm going to keep wearing the mask. I think long COVID should be the main health concern facing us these days. If Nightingale, Barton, and Harper were alive today, I think they'd be urging us to be more vigilant for our own sakes and the sakes of our neighbors. If Dale Gibson were alive today, I think he would be encouraging us to wear our masks and to do some things for our neighbors. And we must be mindful of that human need for connection and companionship and gathering together. How do we prioritize health and inclusion, safety and accessibility? I have thoughts. Worship services should be the most safe, most accessible, most inclusive things that we do. Other events, social events and fundraisers might be less strict in the whole thing. To me, we should err on the side of caution on Sundays and err on the side of gathering and opening things up the rest of the time. Now, I'm still thinking all of this through. Sometimes I have to speak them out loud. So I welcome your feedback. Is this consistent? Is this ethical enough? I want to be clear here. It's the board and only the board that can make policy for the congregation. Circumstances have changed. They are considering making changes to our policies. Please give me your feedback. Please give them your feedback. What should we be doing these days? What is safest and most equitable and most aware of our human needs? This is not the policy. This is not what the board has said. This is just me. I personally would like to require masks on Sundays at least through the winter, even if the CDC status is green. I would strongly encourage masks at all events. And because I know that some people don't like them and some really appreciate not having masks because they are lip readers, I can't imagine allowing folks to not wear them to many events. My proposal is to strongly encourage masks on Sunday mornings from before you enter the building until 10 minutes after the service. And during that 10 minutes after the service, people who are immunocompromised, can attend safely, they can go to the bathroom, they can get food at the potluck if they like and take it outside where they feel safer. And then the rest of us, if we wish to remove our masks, can. Those of us who still want to wear our masks but hang out with people who are not wearing masks and have coffee, have potluck together, I think we should be able to do that. If we're in green status, I think we can sing through our masks. If we're yellow, we won't sing, but we might still have coffee hour after that 10-minute thing. I know this is not a perfect solution. I welcome feedback to make it better. We all do what we can. We try our best with the information we have at the time. Things have changed. Let's make the next iteration the best we can possibly make it. We can be like Florence Nightingale's parents, trying to attend to the judgments of our neighbors and be the rich, cool, fashionable folks, or we can be like Florence herself and attend to the health of our wider community and do our level best to serve all the people. I hope we'll err in that direction, so may we be.